Listen. The world is talking. World Talk Radio. Studio A.
This is Jerry Prokopovich with Civil War Talk Radio. The Civil War ended almost a century and a half ago, but the battle to remember what was done during that tumultuous time continues. Economic development threatens to overrun some of the most valuable and inspirational sites of the Civil War. Fighting that battle for preservation are many people in the Civil War community, among them the Civil War Preservation Trust. We'll talk preservation today with the Policy and Communications Director of the Civil War Preservation Trust, Jim Campy, as our guest on Civil War Talk Radio.
Everyone faces conflict. At home, at work, in the community, in the world. Fix Your Conflicts is a show about how to fix those conflicts with practical tips and techniques. Doug Knoll brings to the internet airwaves the first of its kind, a show that teaches peaceful resolution to life's daily battles. That's Fix Your Conflicts with Doug Knoll, broadcasting live every Monday at 11 a.m. Pacific on World Talk Radio, Studio A.
Answer the President's call to service.
As an AmeriCorps member, I know that Americans everywhere are helping each other, showing strength of character.
As a senior Corps volunteer, I know that Americans are showing kindness and compassion.
As an AmeriCorps member, I see plenty of American spirit and enthusiasm.
Together, we make America strong.
Together, we make America great.
Find out how you can serve at nationalservice.org.
It's your world. It's your chance to make it better.
Apply online at nationalservice.org.
Listen. The world is talking. World Talk Radio. Studio A.
Welcome to Civil War Talk Radio. I'm Jerry Prokopovich, coming to you from the campus of East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina, in my office in the Brewster Building, using, hopefully for the last time, the antiquated phones owned by East Carolina University to be replaced this summer with fabulous new technology, so that when we come back at the end of our summer break, we'll have some increased clarity, both in sound content, sound quality, and maybe even content as well. But don't forget the legal disclaimer. Even though it's easy-to-use phone, these are my ideas. Those are the guests. We're not speaking for the university, nor does it represent our ideas, and so we go our own ways. As hinted just there, this will be our last live show for the summer of 2008. It's time for the annual summer break. In your mind's eye, you can see me sitting back on a beach with a drink with an umbrella in it, but in reality, I've discovered the administrative world never stops, and as acting department chair, I get to stay here the rest of the summer and deal with the various crises that come up in a department of 30 professors. Nothing too dramatic, but there's always some paperwork, some new software to deal with, something or other going on, and they pay a little extra if you hang around, so it's worth it. It's a nice day here in Greenville. The smoke mentioned last week has cleared away from the wildfires that were burning in eastern Carolina. They're still burning, apparently, but under control. So it no longer looks that hazy look that made me think of Chickamauga with or Shiloh, or the wilderness on fire, the woods on fire, and the soldiers trapped within. We're not like that. Things are nice and pleasant today. And it's nice and pleasant here in the office. One of the really great moments of the academic year is at this time, regulations require us to keep students' blue books from their exams at least 1 year after the exam, and the off chance they'll want to come in and see how they did or protest a grade or something like that. But every summer I open the bottom left desk drawer where the old blue books are kept and move them from there into the circular file by the door, which will be cleaned out each night by the building staff. And it is just a treat to see that giant stack of of knowledge moved on. The students have learned it, I've taught it, and now I get it out of my office. All this empty space to fill with new blue books from the next students. So that's what we're doing here at Civil War Talk Radio World Headquarters. If you are around next week anywhere near Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, I'll be speaking June 25th in the evening at the Civil War Institute, and look forward to seeing some Civil War Talk Radio listeners there. Other than that, though, it'll be a quiet summer, we hope, and then we'll talk more when we come back with new live shows on August 29th, the last Friday of August. And until then, we'll go with the rerun shows and hope you can catch up on those. Well, our guest today is someone who comes to us from the current front lines of Civil War conflict, the battle to try to preserve what is left of Civil War sites. He is Jim Campy of the Civil War Preservation Trust. Jim, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you for the invitation, Jerry.
Well, glad you could be on the show. I'm always happy to talk about this important cause. Now, if this were like a regular radio interview, I would start saying, well, Jim, tell us why we have to preserve these sites. What's so important about that? And you would give the answer you've given probably 600 or 700 times about the importance of preservation. We can skip all that today, because if you're listening to Civil War Talk Radio, you already know that these sites are important and why we try to preserve them. So let's go to the next level and skip through that. First, how did you get a job working at the Civil War Preservation Trust, and what's your background and interest in Civil War?
Well, I've been interested in the Civil War since I was a wee child. I think the first book I ever read was the Jeb Stuart one by Burke Davis way back when. And I had an opportunity to work on Capitol Hill, so I was, while they're monitoring some of the preservation fights of the 90s, particularly the Disney fight and the fight to save Brandy Station. And, of course, always maintained that interest in the Civil War. So when I learned that the two national battlefield preservation groups had merged to become the Civil War Preservation Trust, I suspected there might be an opportunity, and I quickly got my resume in. And about 6 months later, I had a job.
Well, when you mention the fights of the 90s, just like old veterans reminiscing about the summer of '64, preservation has a history of its own, and I'd like to talk about that. What are the two institutions that merged to become Civil War Preservation Trust?
Well, the oldest of the two was the Association for the Preservation of Civil War Sites, which was formed in 1987, primarily because of the threats to the Brandy Station battlefield and the Chantilly battlefield in Fairfax County, Virginia. And, of course, as a result of the work of APCWS, the Brandy Station battlefield was eventually saved. Unfortunately, the Chantilly battlefield was lost, but that was the real beginning of the modern battlefield preservation movement.
Does anything
the creation of APCWS.
Does anything go back further than that? I mean, people have been building stuff on or near battlefields since the last gun was fired.
Well, it goes back into the 1880s, really, and even further back. The first monument on a Civil War battlefield was at Stones River, the monument there to
Hazen's Brigade?
That's correct. And, of course, the creation of the National Cemetery at Gettysburg. But, immediately after the war, the generation that had been they made so many sacrifices, had been so traumatized by the war, didn't initially concern themselves with protection of the sites where the fights had occurred. It wasn't until really the 1880s that the veterans started to get more involved to begin to protect the battlefields. The War Department got involved as well, so you had sites like Chickamauga, Gettysburg, and Antietam gradually protected. And when the War Department gave way to the National Park Service in the 1930s, you began to see a little bit more protection at sites. And, of course, the level of interest dramatically increased in the 1960s for the sesquicentennial of the Civil War.
There was I'm thinking of an analogy with the environmental movement. There was some campsite at a national park where you used to just show up and camp and didn't need reservations until one day, and I think in the early 70s, like 1,000 people showed up one weekend for 100 campsites, and it was just a mayhem. And suddenly the Park Service realized, hey, we have to, do something, and that helped galvanize management of at least camping. Was there anything like that? Was Brandy Station, was that the clarion call where people suddenly said, hey, we've got to do something?
Yeah, I'd say, and actually I should have mentioned Manassas as well. Really Chantilly, because of an enormous amount of development that was going in there, both commercial and real estate. Commercial and residential. Manassas, because of a shopping mall that was proposed in the area. It's connected mostly with Second Manassas these days. And at Brandy Station, where there was a Formula One racetrack proposed on that battlefield. And all these fights essentially came about in the late 80s, early 90s, and there was no national battlefield preservation movement to fight them until APCAWS was formed. And
you said this, and I'm almost glad that it was merged out, because that's a very difficult acronym to get around. AAPWS, whatever it was. You said they merged with another group.
That was the Civil War Trust. Now, the Civil War Trust was formed in the early 90s, around 1992, 1993, as a result of a commission that had been established by Congress called the Civil War Sites Advisory Commission. This commission was formed in 1990 as a result of this fight at Manassas I was talking about. And the federal government decided that if it really wanted to see these battlefields protected, it needed to find a better method than what happened in Manassas, which was a legislative taking. 535 acres were protected as a result of this taking, but it wound up costing the federal government over $120 million. And Congress saw at that point that if anything meaningful was going to be saved of these battlefields, it could not be done at those prices. So they set up the Civil War Sites Advisory Commission, which looked at all the battles of the Civil War, all 10,000 battles, skirmishes, and prioritized them according to the preservation threat they're experiencing and also their historic significance. And they narrowed the focus down to about 380 battlefields around the country. And on this commission, by the way, I would mention historian Ed Bars, author and historian James McPherson, and quite a few other distinguished historians and members of Congress participated. And the commission's work has really become the Bible for the battlefield preservation movement. It really helps us identify what still needs to be saved. And also, as a result of that commission, they recommended a federal program, a federal matching grants program to save battlefields. And that program today has become the most effective program out there for protecting Civil War battlefields. So that's a rather long answer.
Well, one of the nice things about the show is we have time to talk about things and really get to them. The Civil War Advisory Commission then is still going in terms of recommending sites or identifying the sites to be preserved?
Actually, the commission concluded its work in 1993 with this report that identified 384 priority battlefields and recommended this federal legislation. Now, their work has sort of been carried on by a agency within the National Park Service called the American Battlefield Protection Program. As we speak, the American Battlefield Protection Program, or ABPP, as we like to call it, is working on an update on that 1993 study. And we believe there's going to be some considerable information there that's going to help us in the upcoming preservation battles that no doubt are going to have to be fought. And of course, identify the land that still needs to be saved.
So, is it the ABPP that has a website where you can see a list of these several hundred battlefields?
That's correct. And the best way to do it is type American Battlefield Protection Program into Google. I can never remember what their address is. It's a little convoluted.
Mm-hmm. But I mentioned that a couple of years ago I was teaching a public history course here at East Carolina University, and for an assignment over spring break, we looked at that website, at that list, and each student chose a battlefield in eastern North Carolina, and there were a dozen within easy distance of Greenville in the eastern half of the state. And their job was to go and see what kind of interpretation existed at these sites. And they came back with everything from fully developed or close to fully developed sites, more like Bentonville or Fort Macon, to sites that were totally unmarked and unprotected. And the students loved the project, to go out in the field and actually see these things. But I was really impressed that the website was there, that the list is there, so that listeners to the show can find out there may be a battlefield in your neighborhood you don't even know about.
Yes, that material that they have on their website is terrific. It's got a nice brief history of each battlefield. And a few years ago, the Conservation Fund and Francis Kennedy of the Conservation Fund did a book based on those battlefields called the Civil War Battlefield Guide. And it's an excellent resource, and I recommend it to your listeners.
Is that the one with the topographic maps as well as the...
Yes.
I think that is. It is an excellent book. By Kennedy, you said.
Yes.
Yeah, that is a very good book. I would guess many of our listeners have a copy. I'm glancing my shelf. It must be at my home shelves. I don't see it here. But, that is an excellent book and a great guide to battlefields. And by tying in the modern topographic maps with historic maps, you can really see what was there. When the two organizations merged, in the 90s, was there conflict between them beforehand? Was this a resolution of something? What brought them to come together? Do you know?
Well, I think part of it was that both organizations were going after the same properties, seeking the same federal grants. Essentially, they were in competition with one another. I think it was a friendly competition, but clearly it wasn't the most efficient use of limited resources. And the merger, and I think, as I think with any merger, there was some conflict and some controversy, certainly at the time, really brought together the best of both organizations. It was at this time that my boss, the president of the Civil War Preservation Trust, Jim Whiteheiser, became president. And anyone that knows Jim knows a very energetic, driven man who's passionate about the Civil War. And he was able to bring those two groups together and make them very effective. So that I know in the first 2 years we had saved somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,000 acres, and had also taken care of $8 million in debt that the two previous organizations were carrying. So that was certainly a considerable success right off the bat. And now, of course, the merged organization, the Civil War Preservation Trust, boasts having saved 25,000 acres nationwide. And to put that into perspective, it's actually more than this. That's larger than the city of Manhattan and about half of the Bronx. So it's an enormous amount of open space.
And land saved from development that would otherwise be lost to interpretation. We're going to take a short break now. We'll come back in just a moment. We'll talk more about the preservation of Civil War sites with our guest Jim Campy from the Civil War Preservation Trust. I'm Jerry Prokopovich, and this is Civil War Talk Radio.